The Pit Press Podcast.
Get a chance to see Ehrlicher, the linebacker, who they say has the potential to be the best defensive player they've ever had in New Mexico. Looking down the middle, throwing into coverage on by New Mexico.
Welcome to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. My name is Ryan Tamori, and as always, I'm joined by the voice of Western New Mexico. He's been a Lobo fan since 1970, Mr. Ed Nunez. Ed, how are you today?
Another great guest, Ryan. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
No, I appreciate it. And this gives us a chance, at least me, who's a big college football fan. Hey, I get to talk SEC football today, so I'm pumped about that. As we record this, as I did just hit the record button, we are 9 days away from the first full Saturday of college football in 2023. I think we're all still trying to get over that crappy taste in our mouths from Georgia and TCU in January of this past year. So with that said, even though I jumped on the TCU bandwagon. Hypnotoad. Oh, I should have queued that up. Big Futurama fan. Our next guest has quite the resume. He's covered the Super Bowl, the World Series, the NBA Finals, NCAA Final Fours. I'm incredibly jealous, and I hope I've got this right. He is now the director of broadcast media and the host of TexAgs Radio and the Luchador podcast on TexAgs.com. He's here to help us preview the University of New Mexico football season opener, which is at number 23 in the Associated Press poll and number 25 in the coaches poll. Those are the Texas A&M Aggies from the big bad SEC. And he's also got one of the best things I've heard or read in some time, and that's, quote, there are two things in sports that get my blood going, Texas A&M and Real Madrid, end quote. His name is David Nuno. How are you, sir? And thank you for joining us here on the Pit Press Podcast.
Ryan and Ed, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for having me. I'm ready to talk some. It's been a really long off season from our perspective. Like, it's been a long 8 months, the same talking points. We're ready for some football.
Good, because I'm going to ask you this question right off the bat. As I mentioned, you covered the NBA Finals. You've been doused with champagne after the Houston Astros won a World Series. Is there an event that stands out in your mind that is more? Is there an event in your fabulous career that stands out more than others? Do you have a favorite child?
I don't have a favorite child. Do I have an event that I think that first Super Bowl that I covered, because it's the Super Bowl. I think the first one I covered was Packers, Steelers, Jerry World back in 2010. I think that's the first Super Bowl I covered. I hate sounding like that guy that, can't remember his resume. I think that was the first one. Going to the White House when the Astros won the World Series in 2017 was spectacular. Covering some international soccer that I've gotten to do. You mentioned the Real Madrid love. I got to watch them. I covered them as a member of the media when they took on Bayern Munich. That was a fun event there at NRG Stadium. So, look, they all have a special place. Going to spring training. You know what? Honestly, I'll take this back. I think my favorite memory from a media perspective, there's two. One was in 2005. AC Law hit the game-winning shot against the University of Texas, A&M versus Texas. Big shot, kind of like the birth of Aggie basketball in this generation with Billy Gillispie. That's one of them. The other one was the 2015 wild card game in New York, Astros versus Yankees, where the Astros were the new kids on the block. Now, that rivalry that the Astros have dominated, by the way, for almost a decade. But they were the new kids on the block. They broke through, and I did an entire 30-minute newscast from the from the locker room, the celebration. So I had champagne all over me. So that was a fun part of it. I think there's a meeting that might be taking place here in this room. Can we pause this interview real quick?
Yes, we can.
I took the conference room because our studio is being used. Let me get out of here because I think there's people trying to get in here. Let me double check. I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay.
No problem.
We can take it from there, though. Let me just double check. Did you need the conference room? I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, guys. People were
totally
walking
fine.
in, and I was like, that would be really awkward mid-sentence. So hopefully you can edit that.
Yeah, we can edit the video. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Sorry.
we had a bit of a conference room blunder there, but you were saying about doing something like a 30-minute hit maybe in
Oh yeah.
New York for
So
the wild card game.
yeah, so I was at the yeah, and after the Astros won, I legit did like the entire newscast from the clubhouse, and I was when I say doused, I mean even after I took my suit to the dry cleaners, that thing it smelled like so much champagne, but it was really the birth of the Astros the way we know it. Carlos Correa, George Springer, all those guys just like arriving. This is before they got Verlander. This was just them, Jose Altuve, obviously knocking on the door saying, "We're here and we're going to be here for a while."
Yeah, I'm fans in Albuquerque are going to love that because I've dubbed this LA East. It's a Laker Dodger town. So, and I'm sure you see my shirt. So, I love the Astros for certain reasons because they beat the team in the Bronx. Um, and I'm sorry that I tried to make a joke there with your with the favorite child question. It was if did you enjoy covering one sporting event than the other? But you obviously answered that. And I didn't even bother to answer if you were a father, but I would imagine you don't have a you don't have a
Father of
favorite.
four.
Oh wow, okay. I've got one, and that's enough. And hopefully becomes an electrical engineer. That's my hope for him. The executive, and I can't let you get away with this with everything that's gone on with what Netflix has done lately. The executive editor of TexAgs.com, Billy Liucci, was featured on Lucci was featured on Netflix's Johnny Football from the Untold series. What did you think of that documentary? And what was it like to have TexAgs featured in the backdrop of a much talked about sports documentary?
So I loved the documentary. I wish it were longer. I wish it was able to investigate it a little bit more, like the Florida documentary that's out now. That's a four-part series. I think Johnny's could have easily been two or three parts because I felt like the very end was kind of fast forwarded. You didn't really get into some of the. I think they could have done much more with his high school days and much more that growth during his time at A&M that first year to that second year and some of the legendary stories that I heard about the bowl game against Duke there in 2013. I guess it would have been New Year's Eve 2013.
It was New Year's Eve 2013.
Uh,
I remember I was at the Albuquerque Journal at like 10:30 that night. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
yeah. So I mean, I loved it. It was so Billy. I consider Billy the Adam Schefter, the Adrian Wojnarowski of Aggie Athletics. This guy, he's the co-owner, the executive editor. He has been like I joined TexAgs 2 years ago as an Aggie. I always followed A&M, but I didn't get to cover them as much as I would like to when I was at my previous stops. Billy's been here since the mid '90s. He started the Maroon and White Report. It blew up into TexAgs.com, and he is just the most plugged in guy. He was the right hand man. He was there for all of Johnny's adventures. So when Netflix came to our offices a year ago, I believe it was the Sam Houston State game, the first game of the year last year, so almost exactly a year ago. And they wanted to interview Billy. I knew he'd be featured prominently. And at the very end, when the credits roll up, special thanks to TexAgs. It was cool to see our company, which started off as a newsletter that's blown up into a TV, a radio show, a message board empire. Like we are just a huge entity. And I think the gold standard, the reason I left local television and ABC as a network is that I feel like there's a passion on the .com side that can't be matched. And they're the gold standard when it comes to college fan sites and college news.
We are doing, and this is not tooting our own horn. I love the Manziel documentary, and I think it's much of what I've heard a lot of other people say. I felt like the last 15 minutes was rushed. And then I thought Swamp Kings came out yesterday, and I happened to put on Netflix Tuesday night, and I watched all 4 episodes. I could not wait for that. And then I don't know what it's been this week. Last night I watched BS High on Bishop Sycamore. That documentary is bonkers. It's great. But what we are trying to do here at the Pit Press is I'm kind of what's the term I want to use? Friends with two gentlemen that work for Bronco Nation News in Boise, Idaho. I like what they implement. I know that there are other alumni at colleges like much bigger than UNM, like Texas A&M, and what you guys are implementing. Obviously, we're kind of looking at your blueprint, and what I was seeing and I'm always digging into what's going on media wise and what other schools are doing. I like what I see. I like the product you guys put out there. I'm not just saying that. It was refreshing to see, and now that we have this little business friendship here, I really appreciate. But I like what you guys are doing. I know I'm going off on a tangent. I really enjoy what I saw, and my other business partner Eric and Ed, but we both saw it, and I think we're both like, man, this is fantastic coverage. So kudos to you.
Well, I appreciate that. I can't take a lot of credit for it. I hope that I'm elevating the game a little bit, but I'll be very honest with you. When I left local television, I left right after the first year of COVID, and I wasn't forced out. I chose to leave because, as a good of a TV station I was at, and they were on the top in the country. I mean, top 10 market with Disney resources. It was a great place for me. But I wanted to go somewhere where it's all about the sport, right? And at TexAgs, we cover it all for 15 hours a week minimum on radio and TV, and then we do a bunch of other programming, and we get to do a lot of stuff with NIL and interview so many different athletes from so many different sports. So it's been great, and it's great for me now to be front row to my university that I would watch with my left eye as I'm covering the Texans and the Astros and the other sports in town, the Rockets. Now I get to do 100 miles an hour Texas A&M athletics.
That's awesome. I appreciate that answer, especially for somebody who started out in print and spent a year in TV. I'm not going to go down that road, but anyway, and it was a TV in a smaller, not a top 10 market. Here we go. Is College Station, Texas still reeling from September 10th, 2022? App State 17, A&M 14, or have the school fans and alumni moved on?
No, we haven't moved on, but we've moved on. And what I mean by that is we think 2022 as a whole was a blip on the radar. We also believe, at least I do, that 2022 had to happen for what I think 2023 and 2024 are going to be. The reason I say that, if this team wins the App State game, if they win 7 or 8 games, I don't know if that's enough of a push to change the philosophy, right? I love Jimbo Fisher. I think he's an excellent coach, and he's obviously one of the top recruiters. We've seen that for a long time. Unfortunately, I think his offense is a bit antiquated, and some of it has to do with execution of younger players. It's not all on Jimbo. I think the players have to take some of the blame there. But I think it took a seismic shift in expectations of being knocked down to be able to decide, you know what, we need a different offensive philosophy, and we need to re-examine the culture that we allow in our locker room. Let's not forget that the 2021 class, and most of them are still here. I know the talking heads will say, everybody's gone. That's not the case. Most people are here. And everybody who was starting is still here, for the record. But, there was some culture. When you bring in a lot of 5 stars, when you bring in a lot of young kids and they become the fabric of the team, who's going to be the leaders, right? And this team was reeling from some older guys moving on and young players moving in. And I think the young players, unfortunately, there were some that just didn't fit the vibe. And look at some of them now. You've got several guys that have gone to a new place that are no longer in the new place, right? You can start with Chris Marshall, who was let go from Texas A&M. He goes to Ole Miss. He's already been let go from there. You've got Denver Harris at LSU, who was almost kicked off the team. He was, a 5-star guy. He was not welcome back here. He goes in the portal, goes to LSU, almost kicked off of LSU. So those are just a few of the different ones that we've seen out here. Smoke Bowie, same thing with Georgia. He goes to Georgia after being here. He's already kicked off the Georgia team in the transfer portal as we speak today. So I think some of the things that happened last year forced the issue to this year. And now we have a different offensive philosophy and a team that at least everybody in August thinks that, they got great culture. But from what I've seen from practice, it seems like a different vibe out there. We'll just see how that plays out here when they take on New Mexico and the rest of the schedule.
To that question, we have another question for you in regards to that. Texas A&M is ranked 23rd in the Associated Press preseason rankings based on their talent. You mentioned a lot of transfers in the portal. People have left, and that's happening throughout college athletics. Is this, based on their talent, is this where you feel they should be? And it's preseason. Things change, things move. But right now, is that where you feel they should be?
Yeah, look, I don't even care about their ranking. They were number 6 in the country last year and going into the season. And I see why they were number 6, right? Let's kind of go backwards. 2020, they were left out of the playoffs. I think they should have gotten in. I understand why they weren't invited in, but they were 9-1 in an all SEC schedule. They were just right off the doorstep of getting into the playoffs. So you fast forward to the next year, and we're thinking to ourselves, all right, we're going to build on that because the next quarterback coming in is pretty elite. We felt that Haynes King was going to be that guy. He gets hurt in the second drive of the second game of the season. So now you're on your backup. And Zach Calzada had one brilliant moment against Alabama, but he wasn't up to par. So you're then bringing in the greatest recruiting class of all time. And then Nick Saban and Jimbo have a war of words. Things seem really good. You get to 2022, and it's a disaster really from the get-go. I mean, that first game against Sam Houston, even though A&M, won, what was it, 31-0, 31-3, whatever it was. The problem with that game was they couldn't block. So that was a sign of things to come. And then we've kind of gone over some of the issues from last year. So to me, the ranking doesn't matter because I personally, if I'm a coach, I want older players more than I want younger players. And I don't care if it's less talent because I feel like older players are A, more invested, B, know the ropes. And this team was full of young guys last year and the year prior. Now, those young guys have a lot of SEC football experience. And you've got some veterans. And you got health. And the health of the team, I think, is the biggest thing. The biggest issue last year beyond the offensive woes was the offensive line. Their starting center, an all SEC caliber starting center, was out for the year for the most part. He missed most of the year, I should say. And you had other issues on the offensive line. So the 23rd ranking is nice. I'll tell you how I feel after Auburn, how I feel after Arkansas, because I think a month into the season, we'll have more of a blueprint to their DNA.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and a lot of things have happened around Texas A&M football even since last year. Texas A&M football coach Jumbo Fisher enters his 6th season as the Aggies head coach. He's done a great job there. You mentioned he's brought in some new coordinators. We'll get to that in a minute. What does he see as the Aggies' biggest? You mentioned the biggest strengths this year. You mentioned along the offensive line, there's been some turnover there and some injuries. What does Coach Fisher see as the Aggies' biggest strengths?
Well, I think their wide receiver room is one of the top 5 in the country. Evan Stewart, as a freshman last year, was incredible. And I think you're going to see just a game. He's going to be a name that you'll know. In fact, against New Mexico, you're going to see him doing his thing. Because, I mean, he's that electric. He's done it against Alabama. He's done it against LSU. He's done it against all. You've got Evan Stewart. You've got Anais Smith, their best player from last year, who missed most of the season, got hurt very early on. He's back. After flirting with the idea of going to the NFL, he had some work to do, but he got hurt last year and he comes back. You've got Moose Muhammad, who, because of Anais' injury, became the go-to guy in this offense last year, has some acrobatic catches. You've got Noah Thomas, he's a 4-star, who's kind of now being perceived as a 5-star. He only started the last couple of games of the season last year. He's a big, tall, powerful receiver. You've got Jade Walker, who transferred in from a smaller school. So you've got all these guys that wide receiver room is legit an offensive strength that will make any quarterback look good. That's A. B, that defensive line. How many 5-stars? I feel like Oprah here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's full of 5-stars, right? They are full of 5-stars. Those guys last year, they were good. They struggled stopping the run. They struggled getting to the quarterback. Part of that, I think, is the youth. When we're talking about 17 and 18-year-old men, because they had 2 17-year-olds on the defensive line playing a lot of snaps. It's a different adjustment to the game when you're 17 going against these COVID players that have the super senior years. When you're talking 17 versus a 23, 24-year-old, I'm sorry, there's such thing as man strength. Your 17-year-old son may be more muscular than you, but he doesn't have that man strength that you have. There's something about that. And I think that was an issue for them. So I think the 2 real biggest strengths are going to be the amount of 5-stars on the defensive line and that wide receiver room. And hopefully the experience that the entire team gathered from last year.
Yeah, it's gonna definitely help A&M for sure. You mentioned on the offensive side of the football, Bobby Petrino, the former head coach at Arkansas, the former head coach at Atlanta, and DJ Durkin is the offensive coordinator. Bobby Petrino, DJ Durkin, the former head coach at Mississippi, enters his second year as defensive coordinator. These are big names for Coach Fisher's staff. Do these 2 seasoned coaches with name recognition help A&M and Jimbo, particularly on the offensive side? You mentioned there was a lack of execution at times, lack of blocking. So how do those 2 coaches, Coach Durkin's second year, Coach Petrino, what kind of difference will he make?
All right, let's play a game. You guys are going to participate in this game. Do you guys know how much A&M scored per game last year?
Wasn't it like 20 points a game?
22 points a game, which is ridiculous. You know how many games they lost by a score? Like 6. Okay. 22 points a game for an SEC school is pretty low, guys. At Kentucky and A&M last year could not score the ball. They could not. I'm telling you, Bobby Petrino is worth at least a touchdown. At least. And I'm hoping for 15 more points. So last year's team, with all the turmoil, let's go through the games. The App State game. They could have won that game. They didn't. They could have won. Could you imagine just a little bit of offense against App State? We're not even talking about it. Beyond that, Ole Miss, Connor Wegman's first start, he had an all-world start for a freshman. They lose by a score. They lose by a score to Alabama on the last play of the game. They go to Evan Stewart, the wide receiver I'm talking to, on a pass right at the end zone on the pylon that misses. They could have won that game. That came down to – that would have been 2 years in a row of beating Alabama. Think about that for a moment. You go through their entire schedule. Yes, they won a one-score game against Arkansas, but they lost a lot of those one-score games. South Carolina, they lose by a score. They were down 17-0 in the first few minutes of that game, an opening game kickoff, an interception, and a field goal. Bam, it was 17-0, and there was only 10 minutes left in the first quarter. They had a chance to win on the last possession of that game. You go through their schedule, imagine what another touchdown would do. I know you can't use this equation, but follow me here for a moment. You can't, because games would be played differently. I recognize that. But if A&M scored another touchdown in the game last year, they're 10-2 based on that, just on the offense alone. Again, I understand you can't use that hypothetical in all cases, but it just shows you this team, with all the turmoil that they faced with that terrible offense, that really all they had was Devon Achane. With that, they could have easily won a bunch of those games. So was life in the SEC. Alabama had a bunch of one-score games. LSU had a bunch of one-score games. So you bring in Bobby Petrino, who is a offensive genius, and you just say, hey, this is your playground. You call the plays. You add some creativity. And his thing is, I'm going to feed the studs. That's music to my ears. You're going to feed the studs. You're going to give the ball to Evan Stewart in space. You're going to give the ball to Reuben Owens in space. You're going to give all these playmakers the ball in space. Yes, offensively, they're going to be dramatically improved as long as the offensive line follows suit. Defense. DJ Durkin, couple things we're working against him last year. First off, first year. That's an issue. It could be an issue for Bobby Petrino. I don't expect it to be, but your first year as a coordinator, there's an adjustment period. You had Mike Elko, who was your defensive coordinator for the years prior. He goes to Duke, and then you've got Durkin in here. There was an adjustment period. There's also the youth. I want you guys to consider this. Durkin, in his first year at Ole Miss before he came to A&M, not very good defense. That next year, their defense was salty. There's something about his defense that in year 2, when the players kind of understand the different fronts he's looking for and the different expectations, they step up. I sound like I'm drinking the maroon Kool-Aid. I'm not necessarily doing that. I'm just painting a picture of why these two areas should be significantly improved. The operative word there is should. But I believe that they both will be better.
You know, when you start feeling old is when Musa Muhammad, someone like, if you're a nerd like I am, Musa Muhammad's son is playing college football. I remember Super Bowl 38 in Houston. Even though Carolina lost that game, he had like a 75-yard touchdown pass from Jake Delhomme. And it hits home on this podcast because Mike Loxley, former UNM head coach, replaced DJ Durkin at Maryland. I am making this simple, and I'm going to do this for Lobo fan who are listening to this podcast. Can you elaborate more on the quarterback situation? And who do you think, you had told me in off the record, you think you know who's going to be the starting quarterback, but who do you think will be the starter for A&M against UNM?
This will air on Tuesday of next week, right? So as of today,
Yes.
what is it, Thursday the 24th?
Yes.
They have not named a starter. Okay, I expect that starter to be named on Monday, and I expect it to be Connor Wigman. That's not to say that Max Johnson could not be the guy. I think he is. There's a lot more upside, I think, with Connor, but you can win a lot of football games with Max Johnson. He did it at LSU. In fact, he beat A&M at LSU when he was their starting quarterback. So Connor Wigman throws a beautiful ball. I mean, a fantastic ball. Connor Wigman can improvise. He could run. He can throw. He's a 5-star quarterback. He was one of the top quarterbacks from that class. When you talk about what that class was supposed to be, It was supposed to be Quinn Ewers, who graduated a year early, Connor Wigman, and Kate Klubnik at Clemson. Connor is the truth. Now he's going to have to live up to it. There's a lot of 5-star quarterbacks that don't live up to their expectations. But this freshman, in his first start against Ole Miss, went crazy. This freshman threw 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in his first year through the SEC. This freshman beat LSU, who was the best team in the SEC West last year, as a freshman quarterback. I think the sky's the limit for this young man. And now you're going to not put him in a pedestrian offense. You're going to give him the weapons that he has that have all grown. I think Connor Wigman could have a dynamic year. Look, in college football in the SEC, you are only as good as your quarterback, and he's got a lot of pressure put on him, but he's got a swagger to him. When I compare him to Johnny, it's not because he acts like Johnny. It's not that he necessarily plays like Johnny, but there's a moxie to quarterbacks. Tim Tebow had it. Johnny had it. Bryce Young, had it. There's certain players that have that moxie, and I think Connor has it with a beautiful throw and a great relationship with his teammates. I mean, you got teammates calling him QB1 before the job's already been given. So he's that level of player, and if he can live up to it, look, he's gonna throw an interception this year, right? You're not gonna go through an SEC schedule and do that. Can he limit those turnovers? And can he get the ball to the players in space? And can he improvise a little bit without getting hurt? That's what I think what he brings to the table. And I think you'll see a very nice outing from him against New Mexico.
You know, Texas A&M has the usual tough schedule. It does the October 7th game against Alabama loom any larger than the rest of the schedule, or is it week 2 against the University of Miami? I mean, you can go down the schedule and say they're all large, but game against Alabama, does that loom larger, or is it second week against Miami?
Well, I'm going to sound like a football coach, and I'm sorry for the cliches and the coach speak, but A&M is at a point where they can't overlook anybody. They got to be so focused on New Mexico right now. I'm going to be very honest with you. I said this on my show earlier, and I think Ryan was listening when I said this. They need to be up 35-0 at the half. And that's not an insult to New Mexico. It's more of a, remember when I was talking about the Astros, the arrival? It needs to be that. Because the last 2 years, their opening game, they've had small leads at the half against Kent State, who A&M was significantly better than, but it was a small lead. In fact, I think it was a 1-score game with about 2 minutes left in the half. And Sam Houston, the same thing. Both of these opening games, I think, were kind of letting you know the kind of team that they have. We've been waiting for this. They've been waiting since November, since right after Thanksgiving, to play football. And people have been telling them how terrible they are. A&M needs to come out and treat New Mexico like it's the most important game in the world. And then they got to go to Miami, which I don't think will be a hostile territory because Miami fans, they come to winners and Miami hasn't won yet. And when they start winning, fans will be there, right? But they got to treat Miami. When you talk about the Alabama game, the thing that I think makes it important is this. It has come down to the wire 2 years in a row. Everyone said last year that Alabama was going to destroy this terrible A&M team. Came down to the final play, okay, without their starting center, by the way, who got hurt. Well, he came back in, but he got hurt. That's where his season ended. It came down to the final play when everything was lost for the season. The year prior, I don't know if you remember, they had lost to Mississippi State the week before, and people were like, Alabama is going to destroy. And they had lost to Arkansas. They had lost 2 games in a row. They lost Arkansas and Mississippi State, and here comes Alabama. What do? They win 41-38 on a walk-off. This game is very important because if you can win this 2 out of 3 years against the GOAT that is Nick Saban, and also do it knowing that you could have won last year on top of beating LSU just a few months prior, I think that game becomes very important. But guess what? You can't rest because it's the SEC. And who do you have the next week? You're on the road in Knoxville. And I'm not as high on Tennessee as I was last year. I was super high on them last year. They got to prove it to me that they have the staying power, and I got to see I got to see more from Joe Milton. Although I know he throws a beautiful ball. That all being said, they're all important to A&M. But sure, anytime you take on Nick Saban, 2 personalities like Jimbo and Nick who have gone back and forth before, it becomes important. To me, though, the most important game. They're all important, as I said, but I think the Ole Miss game is a little important because Lane Kiffin's been talking a little smack to Jimbo for over a year now, and I'm ready to shut him up.
Well, there you go. That leads into my next question, and you kind of answered that. And I'm twisting this. Other than going to Knoxville, other than going to Oxford, as I'm looking at A&M's schedule, Do you feel it's a little bit, and this isn't, again, I'm not knocking them. Do you feel that this schedule really favors what Jimbo and what this team might want to try to accomplish this year? Does it favor them?
If they don't do it this year, I don't know when they're going to do it, guys. And I mean that because there are questions all over the place. Let's kind of go through some of the questions. You've got, I sound like a talk show host, don't I? Let's go through some of these questions.
I should just let you host this. I love it.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, keep going, please.
All right. So, Arkansas, they got KJ Jefferson. Most people think he's the best quarterback in the SEC. He might be. They got a new offensive line. They got to prove it to me. A&M's won 10 of 11 against them. So, hopefully, you can continue that streak. Alabama, they were amazing with Bryce Young. All those games came down to the wire, though. We talked about A&M's games going down to the wire. Alabama had several games go down to the wire. They got to prove to me that Jalen Milroe, who I think will be the starter, or Ty Simpson, or however, Tyler Buckner, they got to prove to me that their quarterback. You mean to tell me Alabama, who came close to losing a lot of games last year, without Will Anderson and without Bryce Young, is going to be better? They might be because it's Nick Saban, but I think it's open for discussion, right? Who else do we got? We go from Alabama, Tennessee. I already told you my questions about Hendon Hooker's moved on to the NFL. A bunch of his receivers, Jalen Hyatt's not there anymore. Can Joe Milton, who's been beat out for the job a couple different times, can he be the guy? We know he can throw it out of the stadium, but can he get it in the hands consistently? So I got questions about Tennessee. Doesn't mean they're not going to be a 10-win team, but there are questions throughout the conference. Look, Jackson Dart at Ole Miss, I think he's a really good quarterback. He played well against A&M. There's a reason they brought in Spencer Sanders to compete with him. They had questions there, right? So you look at that. Mississippi State. Look, I think Mississippi State has, they get unfairly ridiculed a little bit because of the untimely passing of Mike Leach. The offense will probably look better, or look worse, because he's not there. And how can you be better without Mike Leach? If you can't be better with Bryce Young, how can you be better without Mike Leach? But there's questions there other than, Will Rogers, their quarterback. There's questions there, and wide receivers too. Moving down the schedule, I mean, there are questions all over the place. LSU, they have a very thin secondary. And what happened the last time A&M played them? It was at Kyle Field, which matters. A&M took it to them. LSU had everything to play for. Let's not forget, they weren't overlooking A&M. I don't buy that. They had a chance to make it to the playoffs. They were going to take on Georgia. If they take care of business against A&M, they played Georgia with a chance to go to the playoffs. They weren't beating Georgia, but that everything was on the table. So, look, there are questions all over the place. I understand the questions about A&M, and those questions should be. But when you point one finger out, there's three pointing at yourself, and there's a lot of questions for teams that they're playing on their schedule. Miami, 5-17 last year. They have brand new offensive coordinator, brand new defensive coordinator. They got all the talent in the world. They haven't been the U in a while. Can they at home, do something against A&M? And Auburn, the other team I should have brought up. Hugh Freeze is good for a couple wins that people don't expect in his first year. But is it the first game in his SEC schedule being A&M? Is that the one? So I guess the long way of answering your question is every team has a bunch of questions. You just hope that A&M answers more of them if you're an Aggie fan, that last year was the lesson that they needed for this year.
New Mexico comes in as a 38-point underdog. What do you know about the Lobos?
Well, you're not going to like this answer. Not much. And the reality is I typically start my prep on teams. I know a lot about the SEC, but I usually start my prep for teams on the Sunday before the game. So we'll start that this Sunday. I do know this. A&M has struggled in these openers, as I've mentioned, and not struggled by the final score. But the games haven't been as clean as possible. It should be a faceless opponent when A&M takes the field against New Mexico. It should be faceless, right? Regardless of what their record was last year. Was it 3-9 last year? Am I wrong?
2-10.
2-10.
2-10. Sorry. That should not matter because of the pain and the issues that showed up last year for Texas A&M. So if you are A&M, you are taking on a 5-star team every time you go to practice. That better translate when you hit the field at Kyle Field, where these fans are starved for a conference title that we haven't seen since 1998 with all the resources and the facilities in the world. It doesn't mean anything unless you do it on Saturdays.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, just listening to you talk about Texas A&M, a lot of expectations, but you mentioned some questions which every team has. They put it all together, though. Wow, you never can tell what's going to happen. I can't believe it's been since 98 since they won. It's hard to believe.
They beat Michael Bishop and K-State.
Yeah, I remember him. You know,
I prefer to say Sir Parker because that's what I remember, that Sir Parker touchdown. But go ahead.
I remember, yeah, in overtime, right?
Yeah.
Man, that again, you were saying about aging, Ryan. Wow. In September 2 years ago, you know, Texas A&M defeated New Mexico 34-0. Coach Danny Gonzalez has said to his players, he thinks they're a better team. He said that. We were at the press conference a couple of weeks ago. He's mentioned things like we have a swing in our hammer, twitchy, fast athletes. He's turned the roster over, 42 new players. He has said that. He's also said that, you know, the players, when they went to Kyle Field, were in awe of the experience the last time. So he's hoping that that's not the case this time, you know, around. But what makes Kyle Field such a special place to play college football, but also in American culture? You've mentioned Kyle Field more than once. What makes it such a special experience?
It's the home of the 12th man, and that's our thing, right? That's our calling card. It's 103,000 people all standing up all game long, screaming, yelling these yells that the opponents are like, what are they talking about? Like it's just an intimidating environment that I believe is worth some touchdowns in games. I mean, the Aggies had no business beating Alabama a couple years ago. I mean, Alabama took the lead at the very end, guys. This was a game where A&M was up, not significantly, yeah, but significantly. Alabama makes their run, and they make that counter. And what happens after Alabama takes the lead? Devon Achane runs back a touchdown, and they take the lead. Excuse me, it was Anaya Smith in that game. Yeah, I think it was Anaya. Regardless, they scored a kick return for a touchdown, and they take the lead. That place erupted. It is a beautiful place to watch college football. I've never been to Tennessee. I've been told that I'm going to go this year. There's a charm to going to Tennessee, to Neyland Stadium. There's a charm to go to the Swamp. I've been to Tuscaloosa. There's a charm there. Life in the SEC, going to these stadiums is different. Throw in the culture of Texas A&M, the howdy, the yells, like the whole thing. It becomes an intimidating environment. And when they have an amazing defense, which is possible this year, that place is so loud for the opponent offensively and get real quiet for A&M's offense.
I've never seen a game, but I have been to Gainesville, and the Swamp was open. It was on campus, so I walked in. There is a charm. I mean, I'm used to my family ties. My family went to Rutgers, and my dad got his master's degree at Rutgers. So you've placed me with as bad as Rutgers has been for years, other than the blip in the aughts. The birthplace of college football, and then UNM, and I've just been displaced as a college football fan. It's baseball and college football are my 1A and 1B. When I moved cross country about 6-7 years ago, and then I moved back, and of all people, my mom looked at me and she goes, "You're not driving by yourself. I don't care if you're almost 30." So we drove, and we stopped and had breakfast in Norman. We detoured, and then we were on I-40 and we had to go to Knoxville. And if I could, and I've told this story a million times, if I could redo my life, I would have applied to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, because I was just, I don't know, it was unbelievable to me what it was. And then I've been to Blacksburg, Virginia. I'm trying to think, I'm not going to give you the rundown of it, but even just not being, point of that story is just not even being at the football game, just being on campus with what these meccas mean. Yeah. And we have Albuquerque has a mecca of college basketball. That's one of the things I defend about Albuquerque. It's a different feel. It has its personality. It does get loud, but the SEC football stadiums, it's just different. And again, I'd never seen a game. It's just different. I had kind of planned maybe to go to Kyle Field this year, go to College Station. And I thought I'd be traveling there in 2 weeks, and we made the judgment as like, yeah, this could be bad, even though we like Coach Danny Gonzalez and we hope for the best this year. We understand it. I have a terrible, terrible question for you. Do you know any of the jokes or disses that the yell leaders will tell at midnight yell this year because of the viralness of the App State midnight yell last year?
That I don't know. But you know what? This is what I tell people. It's a freaking pep rally. What do you expect them to say, right? Like like it's supposed to be one in this new world that you can catch. I mean, you can probably go to any fan event, like Nick Saban last year when he's talking about Jimbo. Like, I don't think he thought that was going to go viral. He was talking to a bunch of his donors, right? And you speak a certain way to your base, and you probably wouldn't do. And we're in a different world. So no, I love the yell leaders. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Unfortunately, that one kind of bit us on the behind.
It's definitely one of the traditions and that was part of the reason why I wanted to go this year, was to go see that. I'm not talking. Lastly, and again, we're joined by David Nuno of TexAgs.com. I heard you say on the Luchador podcast that A&M could be 8-4, 9-3, or maybe 10-2, and you've kind of gone over this. But what is your prediction for the SEC as a whole this year? And can it be like somebody that Texas A&M that comes out of it? Because you've mentioned all of these question marks. Or are we going to get the usual suspects with Kaiser Soze and Georgia and Alabama, maybe Brian Kelly and LSU? But what is your overall prediction for A&M this year, and what do you see out of the entire SEC as a whole this year?
Believe it or not, I have not done a season prediction because I feel like the last 2 years have been so horrible. 8-4 felt horrible that I haven't gone and said, this is a win, this is a loss. I haven't done that this year. They have the making of a 9-3 team to me, which is why I could see them 10-2. I could see them 8-4 because the 9-3 team, you might win an extra game you shouldn't win, or you might lose a game that you should have won that you didn't, right? So to me, it really boils down to a couple things. Win the games that you're favored in. And they're going to be favored, in my opinion, in every game but 2, potentially 3. Those 2 or 3 are Alabama, and we'll see. Because if Alabama loses to Texas early on and they have quarterback issues, maybe that changes because the game is obviously back here at Kyle Field. They'll be favored against they won't be favored against Bama. They probably will not be favored against LSU on the road. They haven't won at LSU since the 90s. So that just tells you how long it's been since they've won there at Death Valley. And Tennessee, I think they won't be favored on the road there because, Tennessee should have a pretty good record. So can you win the games that you're supposed to? And that means the Mississippi schools. They've lost to the Mississippi schools the last 2 years. They need to sweep the Mississippi schools. You get Mississippi State here. They beat you 2 years in a row. You've got to beat them. You have to. You came to the SEC thinking you're going to beat them regularly, and you haven't. You've got to beat them. You've got to beat Lane Kiffin. So it starts there. You've got to continue your dominance against Arkansas, who's really good and has got one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the entire conference. But you've had success against them. You got to beat them. Auburn, I don't care how renewed, Hugh Freeze brings that offense, and you get them at home at Kyle Field. That's got to mean something. You asked me earlier about Kyle Field. It better mean something when you are a team that finished last in the division. You come to Kyle Field. I don't care if you got a new coach, you got a bunch of transfers. You get slapped in the mouth when you come to Kyle Field. So you win the games you're supposed to, which is never a guarantee in the SEC and never a guarantee for A&M. Trust me, over 30 years, 40 years of being a fan. I will tell you that that's why I lean 9-3 because they're probably going to win. I hope more than one, but one of the games they're not expected to win. And I would not be surprised if that's Bama. I wouldn't be surprised if that's on the road at Tennessee. And I hope they can do it against LSU, but they should win one of those. Unfortunately, they'll drop a game that they shouldn't. They need to be going into that Alabama game at I guess that would be 5-0 going into the Bama game, or 4-1 at worst, right? Does that mean that they lose at Miami, or does that mean that they lose to Arkansas? I think those are 2 potential losses that I think people would be able to understand if you can rebound and beat Bama. But it really starts off to me with the Mississippi schools and taking care of business on the road. They haven't won a true road game in 6 games. So they got to start doing that. That goes back all the way to the end of the 21 season. They've got to win these true road games.
My last question that I've got for it, and I just thought of this one, and we appreciate your time. What we've seen, and this goes back to the opener, is what Albuquerque has talked about and what Lobo fan has talked about is I don't think that there's any inclination that they're going to win this game at all. I think the thing here is if they can go in the old Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan and get them punched in the mouth. As a UNM alumni, and I will put my UNM fandom hat on now, I would like them to go in and at least punch A&M in the mouth. You had mentioned if it's not 35-0 at halftime for A&M, that's what you want to see. I
think New Mexico wants to see that too, though, right? They want to see New Mexico at 35-0 at half. So mine is not like groundbreaking journalism, but
no, it's not.
I think that should be attainable with the kind of anger and mindset that they should have had. But continue. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. That's exactly right. I mean, do you feel like there might be a mood like in the first half, maybe at the third quarter, if UNM is hanging around? What do you think A&M fan would think?
Oh, I know. What does any fan think, right? Like fanatical, like they're all crazy. Like all of us are crazy. All of us, right? Like I watch a game as a journalist, right? And I think sometimes where I'm sitting affects the game. It doesn't affect the game, but in the moment, I feel like it does. I already know our message board, if they're not up, if they throw an interception on the first drive, if, New Mexico scores first, like our message board is going to go crazy because that's just life of being so invested in a team. But that's where I think that happens too, guys, right? Like, doesn't that happen often, like with super teams, that even the great teams, sometimes there's a few minutes where they kind of struggle a little bit and then they get, it was Ohio State, I think 2 years ago. I forgot who they opened up with. It was a Thursday night game, and it was actually a game at the half. And we were told that CJ Stroud was going to be all world quarterback and this and that. And they were struggling at the half. And I don't remember who they were playing. Maybe they were playing Rutgers. Who knows? But they turned it on in the second half, and then they got better in week 2 and week 3. I don't think it's going to be overnight. It's not going to be 35-0 at the half, but that's what I want their mindset to be. And you've got to, when you're A&M or any school, you've got to respect that wisdom, experience, culture all matters on the football field. It's not just the stars by your name, right? It's not just because you get them at home, you're guaranteed. New Mexico, if I'm them, if I'm Coach Gonzalez, my mindset is this team is vulnerable, guys. And they lost a bunch of games last year, and they lost to teams that they shouldn't have lost to. So let's punch them in the mouth. Let's have something designed for this first drive that they're not expecting. And if it doesn't work, guess what? We'll punch them again later. Like, that's got to be the mindset. So, but A&M fans, to get back to the root of the question, they'll panic. As long as the players don't and the coaches don't, stick to your game plan, do what you do well, figure out what's not working and adjust, I think it'll be just fine.
I just want to add one thing, Ryan. David, to your point, those things all happen with every fan, as you mentioned, if you're invested in a team. But you mentioned the 5-star recruits, the depth, the bigger squad, the more experienced squad. You got Coach Petrino, and you've got great people that are on the staff there. So it should be, the way you described it. I can understand what Coach Gonzalez is thinking. He has to think that way. But as far as the more experienced program, who's got more skins on the wall, it should be, like you mentioned, A&M fans would be upset if it's not 35-0 at the half. They would be, and they'd have every reason to think that based on the first opponent of the season. That's just, and this is coming from a Lobo fan who they've struggled here. Coach Gonzalez, admittedly, their team has struggled. He says they're better, but the first game of the year, it's right out of the chute against a SEC team that's admittedly bigger, stronger, better, more experienced. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and just to be transparent here, it doesn't matter if it's New Mexico or Tennessee or Miami week 1. To me, that's got to be the mindset. Right. Like, my mindset is to punish every team that we are going against. So that's not a shot at New Mexico. It's a shot at, I want that off season to be long. I want them to be hungry, right? That they haven't been fed in months. That's what I want the mindset to be. And this is your first chance, like you want to lay it all out there that first game and just go. And I'm not saying the game plan needs to be crazy. John Stockton and Karl Malone, they did something that everybody knew was coming. They knew the pick and roll was coming. It didn't matter. People couldn't stop it. That's what I want A&M's mindset to be. We're going to run it up the middle, and you're not going to stop us because we're angry. We've been working on it, and our guys can block now, and our running backs are going to shine through. That's more of a mindset. Again, not a shot at New Mexico, more of a, we've been waiting for this for a long time. Let's go prove it.
What did Herman Boone say in Remember the Titans? I got 5 plays. Get used to them. They execute. Nobody stops it. So I get it. I get it. Yes.
He is the director of broadcast media, the host of TexAgs Radio and the Luchador podcast on TexAgs.com. His name is David Nuno. We appreciate your time. This was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed talking about it. It's funny, as a host, you ask the people the questions. It's kind of fun to answer some of the questions. So thanks very much for making me a part of the show.
No, we appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great one.